Hello there, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Welcome to hashtag. I said the hashtag, lol. Welcome to OWL Countdown. That's right. This is week 6 of OWL Countdown. We are nearly there. We are just a few weeks away now from the league starting. So we have this one. This is our second to last team preview session. And then we have one more next week. So this week we have 3 very, very interesting teams to talk about, and we've had a load of news come through. So we're going to do team previews first, then we're going to talk about the news. It's going to be a good old session today, but the teams that we're going to be talking about today are the infamous LA Valiant, the fresh looking New York Excelsior, and everybody's favorite from last year, Dallas Fuel. So without further ado, I want to jump into this, and we're going to start with the very, very infamous LA Valiant, because where else would we actually want to go at this current point in time? My sources died. Give me a second. Okay, my sources woke up. We're good. We're back. We're fine. We're all right. So, LA Valiant. Where do we even start with LA Valiant? I think we got to mention last year first and foremost. 2021 was an absolute shit show for LA Valiant. They were terrible. They were awful. This team, this organization was absolutely infamous in the way that it decided to, move its entire organization over to China last year, and in doing so, due to COVID, due to being able to get yourself visas, they basically dropped their entire roster. They also dropped all of their coaches. Really, really, really terrible move. Terrible move. Made them incredibly unpopular, infamous, and it reflected in their season as well last year. They were terrible. They didn't win a single game. They took one map maybe off of Fusion when they were doing pretty badly. Like, honestly, this team were a laughing stock. And it showed because, having to pick up that many players on the eve of the season is incredibly difficult. So, yeah, they basically drop everyone. Long story short, they drop everyone. Unsurprising, really. I mean, the team wasn't great, to be perfectly honest, in the nicest possible way. I thought there was some okay parts to this roster. Like, for example, I actually thought the Milan round was okay. I thought Milan round was all right. But other than that, yeah, no, the team wasn't it. It wasn't it at all. So who did they bring in? They drop everyone. Who did they bring in? Well, first of all, they have to have 6 players. So it says they've only got 5 on Wikipedia, but they have to have 6. It was announced already at the start of the season. Well, I say start of the season, a couple months back, that every single team has signed the minimum of 6 players, but we just don't know who that 6th is in the case of Valiant. And we're expecting more announcements, which is why I tried to leave this preview as late as I physically could. So they bring in 3 DPS players and 2 support players so far. The 3 DPS players, Dia, Innovation, and Becky, and the 2 support players, NYXL and Coldest. I'm going to start with the support players very briefly. So we were talking about Chengdu last week. We looked at some VODs of Team Chaser against Billy, and NYXL was on that Team Chaser contenders team, which is unfortunately, and this is part of the news I'll talk about later, has now folded, which I think is essentially been confirmed now. Anywho, NYXL was the main support for that team, and NYXL was pretty good, honestly. I thought that NYXL had some potential. I thought that NYXL was relatively consistent. I mean, NYXL probably would have moved up to the Hunters if given the chance, but the fact of the matter is that the Hunters already had a Veltal and Nisha, ahead of him. So very, very difficult when you're trying to make your way past those 2 players who have been ridiculously good for the Hunters last season. So NYXL obviously leaves that organization. He gets picked up by the LA Valiant. This is probably a good place for him to try and make a start, and already it's definitely an upgrade from. I can't even remember out of Hybe and Wire who their actual main support was last year, but this is an upgrade in my opinion. The guy's good. That's fine. Potential. Coldest is an interesting one. So Coldest obviously went on to Hangzhou Spark last year, had so much potential, walked into that team with loads of potential, loads of hype going into it, and basically only played a couple of games after MCD gets kicked out of the roster. Now, in those couple of games, I actually didn't think that Coldest lit the world on fire. As much as it pains me to say it, I actually thought that MCD was better than Coldest from what was being shown. And the likelihood is that even though the Spark can't manage a roster to save their lives, maybe Coldest was being left out of the team for good reason. Either way, he's been given another chance on the LA Valiant, another chance to actually maybe make things right, maybe try and live up to some potential that he had coming into the 2021 season. So who knows, really? I think this is fine. Again, this is definitely an upgrade of the support line. If you ever wondered, if it was ever a question, this is an upgrade of a support line. Let's be real, the roster last year was that bad. So, there's some hopium there for Valiant. Upgrades, people, upgrades. Let's talk about the DPS. So, they signed 3 DPS talents. They signed Dia and Innovation from Team CC, and they signed Becky from Team Diamond. Okay, so I'm going to play some VODs, man. I'm going to play a little VOD of this. Innovation, we'll talk about Innovation a little bit in a minute, but I just need you guys to watch Dia for a second. This guy is cracked. Now, fun facts about Dia, for people that obviously don't know and aren't as aware of Overwatch League. Dia used to play on Shanghai Dragons, infamously the 2018 Shanghai Dragons. And while they did go 0-40, Dia is clearly an excellent talent. He's a really, really good hit scan player. You would expect him to come in on the Cassidy, on the Widowmaker, on the Ashe, that really hardcore hit scan. And they've got a lot of talent about them. Like, really, this is a really excellent pickup. I wouldn't have been shocked to see Dia get picked up by another team, potentially. I wouldn't have been shocked to see maybe Hangzhou take a punt at it if Shy wasn't there. Guangzhou could have definitely done with it. I think the Dia is definitely better than Choice A1 and Eileen. I genuinely think the Dia is really, really, really good. Dia took a break last year as well from contenders, so they were playing on Team CC in 2020 season, but 2021 they went to basically full-time streaming. But look, the guy is really impressive. Like, look at that! Jesus! Oh god, he's cracked. And I really like this pickup. There was obviously rumors last year that he was asked to sign for Valiant last year, but he turned down that offer because he didn't want to play on a team that wasn't going to win any games again, because obviously this man must have a pretty rock-solid mental to, have the season that he did on Dragons and then come back into the league. That's a big hit to take, and then to still have the confidence to eventually come back in. I think that's really impressive, and it deserves to be mentioned for him, to be perfectly honest. So I'm a big fan of this pickup. I'll let this keep playing, but I think Holdest is actually in this VOD as well. I can't remember. He's playing with someone, but anyway, doesn't matter. So who are the other 2 people they pick up? They pick up Innovation, and they pick up Becky. So I'll be honest, I don't know too much about Becky on Team Diamond. I didn't really get a lot of chance to do a lot of study for this week's team previews. I've been very busy this week, but I think that Becky's going to be taking a backseat to Innovation most likely. I think Innovation played with Dia on Team CC. Innovation is a pretty excellent tracer, actually. Innovation does a lot of flex heroes as well. I'm pretty sure Innovation has, your Pharahs, your Echoes underneath the belt. Most of the gameplay that I saw him play on was on that tracer, so you'd probably expect Innovation to stay in quite a lot of the time. And he has what is essentially the seal of approval from, Dia's as well, from their old coach, which is NoHill. I'm going to take this footage off the screen for a second so we can talk a little bit about NoHill, because NoHill is the new coach that's come in to manage this team for the year. Now, what's interesting about NoHill, from what I've heard from obviously respected members of the community say, and from what I've gone and looked up about him, is that NoHill was pretty much the brains of the operation behind Team CC's success, as you can see here, back in 2020. Like, that's a lot of first places there. The guy clearly knows how to coach a team, which is good. You want that kind of experience going in, and obviously being, native to China as well, building a Chinese roster is probably something that you really, really want. So this is me quoting Avril quite a lot here, but Avril had very, very high hopes for him, so this is good. Obviously, he's worked with those 2 players in particular, so, I mean, why not bring him in? Why not bring in the talent that you already know? Hit up your connections, try and get him in. You're working with some reject talent, i.e. Coldest, which is fine, but you see potential. If he's bringing Becky in as well, I don't think Becky's going to play over Innovation. I think that NoHill obviously has a reason for bringing them in. And I think if you're a Valiant fan, you probably have to look at this coach and think, yeah, I'm a trust in this guy because of the pedigree that he has coming in, which is excellent. So look, you can see here, this is Becky. Becky has the Mei, the Tracer, the Doomfist. Interesting. Okay. Innovation. You'll see he's got Tracer under his belt. Again, a lot of these sort of flex heroes. A little bit of hard hit scan. you know, so you Widow, you Cassidy, but otherwise it's pretty flexible from innovation, which is what we like. What we like to see. So that's those are most of the announced pieces of the roster. And also I really don't think I spent enough time on the coach, but I cannot understate that having someone that knows what you're doing, blowing up the roster, having the chance to build a roster of your own accord is going to be an excellent plus point for the LA Valiant this season, who really should just be renamed like to a Chinese brand at this point. They're not coming back. I can't see this roster ever coming back to NA, and if they do, it would be kind of crazy. So 5. That's 5 players. Obviously, a glaring issue with this team, there's no tanks. Or no announced tanks. That's where their assistant coach comes in. Ladies and gentlemen, OWL. OWL is an Overwatch League champion. Why? Because he won the Overwatch League in 2018 with the London Spitfire. Oh, man. I mean, in all fairness to OWL, right? OWL's fine. I mean, obviously, he was on that GC Busan roster that got picked up and sort of amalgamated into Spitfire. But let's be real, OWL was like the one behind Fury. You know, out of the 2 off tanks that they had, Fury was the big boy. Fury is absolutely excellent. So, yeah. Either way, though, they need tanks. OWL has been grinding it out in contenders, as you can probably see here. He's obviously running as a coach now, but up until I think last year, he was still playing contenders. So, you know, Team CC in 2021, there was the off tank. So obviously he knows No Hill. You know, he's been working with No Hill, which is excellent. Runaway, was it? No, not Runaway. Yes, no, OWL was on Runaway as well in 2020, which is cool. So look, the guy's got a bucket ton of experience underneath his belt. He's obviously worked with the main coach, and he's obviously been drafted in either as a coach or potentially the rumors are that he was to play that tank role. However, nothing's been confirmed yet. But I mean, if I'm a Valiant fan and if I'm looking at this roster and I'm thinking, okay, OWL's playing tank, that's not a bad thing. I'm okay with that. This roster at that point is, you know, pretty respectable. Is it competitive? I don't know, purely because of how strong a lot of the rosters are in APAC at this current point in time, but it's for sure it's a step up from last year. I will address some of the rumors though. There's 2 more players rumored to be a part of this team so far that are not obviously announced. The 2 players are, so Halo Thoughts this week talked about Ezhan. Now, Ezhan, I think, was also on Team CC, but is also another DPS player. This team originally did have Michaeli, who was on Guangzhou Charge last year, but allegedly they were signed, and now they're not signed, and now they're gone. Typical Immortals, making things difficult even. And now apparently Ezhan is with them, who again from Team CC. Interesting. So Ezhan was the person that was essentially playing in 2021 over Dia, because Dia took a year out. So, you know, if that's what you want to do, if that's what, you know, No Hill thinks is right, then, I mean, fair enough. At that point, though, 4 DPS players, that's a lot of cooks in the kitchen, and that leads me to believe that they had some holes that needed patching up. Otherwise, why are you signing a 4th DPS player when most of the league's teams are really settling in on 3? You know what I'm saying? So that's interesting. And then the other rumor is about Sashin. Sashin was signed to Hangzhou Spark in 2020, I think, and didn't play a single game. I remember seeing that name on the roster, didn't play a single game, hasn't seen him since. So, you know, that's the only potential pickup that strikes me as a shit, we need a tank, you know, kind of thing. And they're trying to pull someone in. That being said, with what's happened to Chengdu's academy team of recent, I wouldn't be surprised if there aren't a couple more Chinese players going on the free market at this current point in time. Like there's a lot of talent coming out of Team Chaser, you know, Jimmy, Kaneki, many more. My brain is fried. I'm actually going to go and have a quick look at Team Chaser here, actually. We might as well. I mean, I was going to address this at the end of the stream, but I think it's really important to actually think about it. So, yeah, allegedly this roster has unfortunately sort of like fallen apart. But look, there's a lot of good talent here, you know. As I said, Jimmy and Kaneki, if Altel's on 2-way, so he's not necessarily going anywhere yet. Yang Xiaolong used to play for Chengdu, and I thought was pretty okay, but it's now the coach. So you've got a tank in the form of X-Ray here. You know, Kyo's pretty good. I know that Kyo came up at one point. Dai, another tank here. there's potential. You know, these players may be going onto the free market at this current point in time. And if the other rumors are to be believed, that Chengdu themselves have to, you know, look at some of their players' contracts, i.e., I think the 5 that were mentioned were Nisha, Yveltal, Faraway, and Monk, and Leave potentially. I think it was Leave anyway. I mean, if it is, I think it's just purely because that MVP status meant he had to take home a fat bag, so he might have to renegotiate. But again, don't quote me on any of this, but that's a lot of potential talent that Valiant could end up sweeping in and picking up because they still need it. But it's interesting. There's still a lot to know about this team. There's still a lot that still needs to come out. We can only speculate about the tank line. But if we're looking at this team, if we're assuming they have one of Huyal or Sashin, or they get in another one of those team chaser tanks, and then they have the roster that they have, let's disregard Izhan for now. Like, I mean, I would expect Izhan to come on here, but you know, they have 3 DPS. Let's just pretend that they sort of like work with those 3. Then the one thing that we know for sure is that this team is definitely an upgrade over last year. That much we know for certain. The only thing that I think is in jeopardy is about how high could they climb in APAC. Personally, I think you're tussling out at the bottom with the Guangzhou charge. I unfortunately, I sincerely think that is the limit that this team can get to, just because of how much talent is now in APAC. I mean, when you look at the top 3 in APAC, so currently Chengdu, obviously that's subject to change at this point. Shanghai, Seoul Dynasty, those are 3 very, very strong teams. Obviously, Fusion, I think, I'll talk about Fusion next week, obviously, but Fusion, I think, have a lot of potential, especially in the damage department. Oh, that damage department is nasty. And then also Hangzhou, even though Hangzhou have been, as I said already, a mess over the last few years, and I've said it in my previous team preview, I think that they have a lot of talent. You know, that team has surely got enough talent to be able to cope with Valiant and Guangzhou. So, you know, that's where I'm sat on Valiant. You know, if they can get themselves into one of the tournaments, I think they've had an amazing year. I'm not even kidding. If they can overperform, you know, because what you will always get in like the season, okay, especially when you do your power rankings, right, is that some teams work despite how much talent they've got on them or how little talent, and some teams just don't, you know? And there's always that variance that means that maybe Valiant can slide up a place or 2, or maybe they sit rock bottom and they really can't reach any potential at all. We simply don't know at this current point in time, but just based on the talent that they have there alone, you know, I think that if they can make it into one of like the APAC tournaments, like the regional tournaments, I think that would be a pretty decent season for them personally. I mean, surely it can't be worse than losing every single game, as long as you win a game, which I think they'll do this season. I think they'll win a game, at least one, you know? I don't think they're bad enough to lose every game at all. Anyway, we'll keep updated on that roster as it moves along, but another roster that I've had to keep updated on, and still, as of the time of recording, hasn't announced its 6th player, is the good old New York Excelsior. Now, in comparison to the LA Valiant, who have stayed over in APAC, NYXL have come back. They have finally returned to NA, which is great. I'm happy to see that for NYXL. It made sense for them to move over to APAC when COVID happened, because obviously their roster was heavily Korean. So, you know, it just made complete sense, but now they're back, and that's really nice. It's great for New York fans to see their teams coming home, and they also have a really, really interesting roster, or should I say the Florida Mayhem in disguise. Let's go through it. So, in 2021, how was their season last year? They were 14th overall. In APAC, they were 6th, so they finished above, I think it was Guangzhou and LA Valiant, I think. They made it into the June Joust somehow. I remember that. That was the stage where Hangzhou looked like they were running away with it, and then they dropped the ball to New York, and New York snuck into the June Joust, only to be kicked out like immediately by, I think it was Shanghai and Atlanta. I could be wrong, but you know, I thought that New York, for their roster last year, didn't do absolutely terribly. I think this was a team that you came in with a lot of like new look and a lot of different talent, and it just didn't work. You know, a lot of that I think was essentially sort of like Yakpung. I mean, Yakpung, Toronto in 2019 went back to contenders for 2020. 2021 came back up, didn't really look like the finished article. So yeah, I think that was probably the pillar of their downfall. But they had some interesting talent on this team. So I thought Friday was pretty bad, actually. So Friday not playing on this team anymore is fine to me. I think Ivy was really good, especially in the year that he had on Philadelphia the year before. So shame that Ivy's retired now, but they drop Ivy, obviously. Guangboon only came in really to do Widowmaker things, but he did that incredible like 5k play on Junkertown at one point, which was just nutty. But obviously the guy's a Widowmaker one trick. You know, it's a role that Flora could obviously occupy, so it makes no sense to keep him there. Kalios is, and Jonak are obviously the main two that they drop that, you know, probably had some caliber. Because when Kalios came in, the team looked better. Jonak obviously is a New York staple from that original roster that was absolutely dominant back in 2018. Like, this New York Excelsior used to be such a juggernaut, man. And the fall from grace is quite sad, really, to be perfectly honest. Obviously, Jonak is no longer on Seoul either. He has withdrawn from the league for personal reasons, and they also dropped Bianca and Feather. I thought that Bianca was you know, and they dropped him midway through the season so that Yakpon could excel with Kalios by his side instead. And Feather, it's a shame because much like Guangboon, much like Ivy, I thought that Feather was a really good talent coming in. I thought that, you know, that's a potential, you know, diamond in the rough, but unfortunately Feather also didn't really live up to it. So who do they bring in instead? Well, first of all, they keep Flora. Okay, so on a personal level, I don't think that Flora lit the world on fire last year, but I thought that Flora had some pretty standout moments. And also, I think that Flora was the most consistent of all of their DPS players. So it makes sense to keep Flora, you know, pretty versatile, excellent hard hit scan, you know. I think this is, if you're going to keep anyone, obviously Jonak and Kalios maybe not included, you keep Flora. Fair enough. Good stuff, New York. And then they bring in 4 players so far. There must be a 5th player in there because legally they have to have 6 players at this current point in time. We just don't know who that is. So let's start with the other DPS player that they bring in because I'm just gonna put the VOD on real quick. They brought in Yaki. They brought in Yaki from the Florida Mayhem. Okay, Yaki is an absolute lethal DPS player. He is absolutely lethal. I think that this guy's Tracer is up there with Leaves. I think that this guy, if he's on the right team and has the right pieces around him, could easily have an MVP season like Leave. And that is big words from me. I think that's big words from anyone, to be perfectly honest, based on how absolutely instrumental Leave was last year, but really he was just something else, man. He really has been, especially on 2020 Mayhem. He was just absolutely incredible, you know. The man is like the purest form of Hyperflex as well. Like, he can do hit scan. His Tracer is, as I've said, off this fucking planet. Look at him there, just making a quick stick anyway, as he does. Fine, not a problem. And he also plays the flex rolls really well. You know, he's got a great Genji in him. His Vara is exceptional. So guys, good. This is an incredible pickup for New York, and I think this is the superstar DPS that you really, really want to start mounting any kind of competitive return to in North America. So, great signing, really good. I'm staying on this page as well because Gangnam Gym gets picked up by the Mayhem as well. Gangnam Gym here on the Zen. I thought Gangnam Gym was pretty good last year, actually. I've really liked Gangnam Gym in 2020 as well. Like, the guy's got a pretty good Zen. The guy's got a pretty good Ana. His Baptiste, I think, is his standout, really. So those are 2 pickups from Florida Mayhem, and they also pick up a coach as well. Kuki moves across with them, but we'll get into that, and we'll do a little bit more of a deep dive into Gangnam Gym in a bit. But focusing solely on this DPS line is good. I think that there's, as I said last week, I think that there's a benefit to having smaller rosters, in the sense that with smaller rosters, you can form sort of like more of a tight-knit unit. You know, you work out how everyone plays. It maybe becomes a little bit more synergistic, but obviously not being able to cover for a lot of roles is difficult. I don't think that this DPS line is perfect. I think that maybe there's a couple of roles that they're missing. You know, there's probably a couple of holes that they could afford to plug up with like a DPS pickup of some regard, but I think that for the most part, having Yaki in there is enough to make me excited about what this team can do. And I think that Yaki is just that talented that if they are missing anything, I think he could pick it up. Much like Sparkle was able to do last year for Dallas Fuel when everyone was like, oh yeah, they don't have a Tracer player. Yeah, I think this guy is going to be absolutely fine. So simply don't worry about it. Yeah, I like the DPS line, man. DPS line is good. We'll see how they go, honestly. And they also get to play Gladiators in their first day, so I'm going to be watching that. That's going to be terrifying. Let's go on to the support line then. So Gangnam Jin is joined alongside by Myeongbong. Myeongbong has come off of Boston. Boston, as I said last week, I think he was one of their bright sparks over the last 2 seasons. I think if you're a Boston fan, it's a shame to see him go. But at the same time, I think he's probably warranted like a bit of an upgrade onto a better squad. Like, he has been pretty good. He's been pretty consistent. I don't think that Myeongbong is, and I've said this so many times in these previews, right? But I don't think that Myeongbong is anywhere near the top caliber of flex support, you know. And in all fairness, I actually don't think Gangnam Jin is either. I don't think Gangnam Jin sits up there with, you know, Alarm level, Jonak level, Shu, Izayaki, Violet kind of status. Not at all. But I think that both of them are very, very consistent. I think Gangnam Jin probably has a slightly higher peak, but I think that they're both very consistent players, and I think that they'll be an asset to this team. I am very concerned that there is currently no main support in here, and at this point, it's where I would say, even though I'm not a fan of Friday, I would have tried to keep Friday on board just to make sure that that hole is plugged up, if they haven't gone and got someone already as their 6th. So that's interesting. And I think clearly with the way that the Overwatch 2 is looking, I think that it's important to A, have all your bases covered in case something does pick off, and B, I think it's really important to have an access to a Lucio player, because speed looks like it's going to be kind of interesting in this game. So yeah, let's see. The other thing I worry about is I don't know which of these 2 players, especially if they chose to have another tank or another DPS as their 6th and they don't sign a main support, who are these guys picks up Brig? Because as I said in my 5v5 review of Shock and O2 Blast, I really think Brig's important. I think Brig's going to be vitally important. So we'll see how they get along, but I am concerned by the fact that they definitely haven't filled a hole there. And finally, they signed Kellen, which means I'm heading over to watch some Contenders VODs, I've spent a lot of time on this Talon and O2 Blast VOD, a lot of time on it over the last God knows how long. And we've basically gone through a lot of these players. We went through Chorong for Toronto Defiant, we went through Vigilante for Washington. Obviously, we've been through Proper, Finn, Kilo. We're going to have to go through Chio as well in a second when we go on to Dallas Fuel. But Kellen moves over to NYXL from Talon. So when I was watching a lot of the VODs of Talon last year, it's clear that Talon really were excellent. They were excellent. And I think that Kellen's aggressive dive style, especially on the dive tanks, was excellent. I also think he's incredibly well-rounded. I think his Reinhardt's actually pretty good as well. So you basically pick up the main prospect from Korean Contenders in terms of main tank. That's good, you know. Avril said it best on Plat Chat when they did their New York Excelsior episode. The fact of the matter is that Yakpung was something, and New York basically turned around and said, we need a good main tank there. That one, give it the bag, bring it in. You know, that's fair. That makes sense. That's smart. I rate that. I have to say, but in watching these VODs in particular, and watching Talon and O2, it's clear that Junbin is a very, very talented player as well. Unfortunately, Junbin is below league age. He's still only, I think, 16, 17, so he wouldn't be able to play in the league this year at all. So makes sense why they've gone for Kellen instead, and I think that Kellen has warranted a place in a team like NYXL. I think he's really quite excellently talented. I'm a little bit worried about a more defensive style from Kellen. Like some of the times when he gets caught out, I think he has a tendency to feed a little bit as a result. But I thought that he was pretty good, you know, last season, and I think that this is an excellent prospect. It's an excellent pickup. I'm going to see if I can find anything like it. Maybe, I mean, at the end of the day, it could just be the fact that O2 Blast them that much better, but I was a little bit concerned about that from Kellen. So that's a tank. Notice how they don't have another tank. They don't have an off tank. So again, maybe their 6th player is an off tank. Maybe he's not an off tank. RIP. For the time being, though, this is it. This is all they've got, and they have to have another piece. They simply have to have another piece, but we don't know who it is. I don't know if any rumors have provided who it is yet either. I've gone digging for that, but we just simply do not know. So based on these 5 players alone, the first thing is that you cannot overlook the fact that there are definitely holes in this roster. But because obviously they have to have another player, they have to have filled at least one of them. So they have to have filled at the very least the tank hole, which to me I think is probably more important. Because obviously if off tanks end up being really, really strong in Overwatch 2 and you don't have a player that can play off tank, then you're in a bit of trouble there, especially since the tank is going to be such a focal point in this game, most likely, seeing as the role is being reduced to 1. So it's a lot of pressure on that one player, you know? A lot of pressure on Kellen to learn off tanks, if that's the case. To continue with the Florida Mayhem narrative, I mean, bring Gargoyle over. I like Gargoyle. I said it going into last season. I really like Gargoyle. I think that's fine. I mean, hell, try and get Huyal. No, it's a joke. Don't worry about it. So yeah, that's interesting. I would like to see them sign a main support as well, but I mean, hey, if one of them can pick up main support, fair enough. But you know, surely you want to be going into this season with someone that actually knows how to play Lucio, because it takes time to build up those mechanics, man. Not everyone's like Violet and can pick them up relatively well overnight. But again, I notice how I say relatively well. I don't think Violet is anywhere near the pinnacle of Lucio's personally. The thing is with this roster, the thing that everyone's drawn to and looks at is that DPS line is cracked. It's really cracked. And I think that it has the potential to be incredibly cracked and probably one of the best in the league if they perform to their highest potential, and Yaki almost certainly will, to be perfectly honest. He's never shown me that he can't. So a little bit on the coaching staff as well. They bring across Kooky from Florida Mayhem. So the thing is, when I look at this team, okay, I've talked about, you know, the talent, I've talked about the holes, okay. The coaching on Florida, I've always thought was good. I was really sad last year because I thought the Florida were going to be good again. I thought that OG would actually click with the team. I thought that Slime was an upgrade over Chris and whatnot, and it didn't work the same without Fate. So it's interesting, you know. What we're looking at here now is we're looking at Kookie's back in. You essentially have another roster with high levels of talent, you know, all sort of like that mid-range of talent, like you know, like Gargoyle, Gangnam Jin really have been in Florida's case anyway. The question is this going to click? Is Kookie going to get it right this time, you know, or are they going to have, you know, much like what happened with Mayhem, are they going to have metas where they excel, or are they going to have metas where they absolutely flop? I mean, I thought in 2020, Mayhem were a team that had a lot more high highs and were pretty relatively consistent over most of the season. You know, they were pretty threatening to most teams in the way that they were playing, especially in certain metas. But last season, they had basically that one good meta where they got into the May melee, and then other than that, nope, they were not it, Chief. They simply were not it, Chief. As you saw with the OG fiasco and whatnot. So there's a lot of questions surrounding this team. But I think that if you're New York Excelsior, that I think with the caliber of players on this roster so far, and then with some players left to be desired / revealed, I think that you're surely looking at top 8. If this team isn't top 8, I would call that an underperformance based on especially this DPS line. I think that they could realistically challenge a little bit higher, maybe up to sort of like 6th-ish, depending on who really drops the ball from the teams above them, and depending on who this team actually brings in. So yeah, I think, long story short, I think there's a lot to be excited about New York Excelsior, but let's be careful. Let's tailor our expectations until we see the last couple of players announced, personally. I really think that first game against Gladiators is going to be interesting because, and this is a little hindsight, it's a little bit of a preview of my thoughts for Gladiators next week. But I think that Gladiators always start slow. So if New York can really come out of the blocks, much like Florida kind of did last year, I think that there's an opportunity for New York to surprise a lot of people in that first game. Okay, that's New York. Let us move on to the big boys. It's time to talk about the Dallas Fuel. After I've actually stopped myself from dying. Okay, Dallas. 2021. Dallas had the most successful year ever in the history of that team. It was pretty stunning, actually. Obviously, Dallas come in, they sign Rush as their head coach. You know, they bring in a lot of the Paris's successful players from the 2020 season when Paris were excellent. You know, they bring in Sparkle, they bring in Harbin, they take Fearless away from Shanghai, which everyone was surprised about. You know, they keep Doha. The team was excellent. It really was excellent. And last year, May Melee, you know, they win. They literally finally win a stage title. Really good for them. They remained competitive all season. They qualified for all but one of the regional tournaments. Like, you know, the Hawaii sort of like regionals, and then they make it to third in playoffs. They obviously get taken down by Atlanta at the end, who were on a pretty hot run at that point in time. But this team was great. This team was absolutely phenomenal, and much in a similar vein to Shanghai, with obviously a couple of tweaks. This team just decides, yeah, we're going to run it back. I titled this stream, "Are Dallas going to be successful?" or something like that this season. Spoiler alert: yeah, they should be. They really should be. If they're not successful this season, I would be incredibly surprised. So let's talk about this roster. Let's go support, tank, then DPS. So starting with the supports, they sign Chio. What a surprise! Chio is over here. Well, actually, yeah, there he is. Chio's been playing a lot of Brigitte on O2 Blast. Basically took Vindime's position. So Vindime is obviously the one main support that is now on Seoul Dynasty. Man, there were a lot of good support players coming out of Korean contenders this year. Like, it's kind of nuts. But Chio basically went into O2 Blast and kind of stole his place. Played a lot of the Brigitte, has a really good Lucio under his belt, and as I've said already, I'm very high on people that can play Brigitte in Overwatch 2. So Dallas, make sure to go pick him up after Jexay leaves the team. Now, I thought Jexay was great, actually. It's interesting because obviously Jexay, I think that Jexay got a pretty bad rap from most people. I think that Jexay, maybe people thought that he was being carried a little bit, but I thought Jexay was fine, you know, completely serviceable, you know, sort of like within that top 5, 6, 7 main supports in the league, which maybe isn't saying as much, but like he was consistent. And consistency is really, really important when you're trying to win titles, when you're actually trying to compete for stage titles and qualify each time. So, give Jexay the credit he deserves, but Chio comes in as a replacement, and I think what a fitting replacement, you know? Worked excellently on O2 Blast, has a really, really good Brigitte under him. You know, this is good. This is a solid selection to try and fill a hole that was left by a good player that you had last season. He's joined alongside by Fielder, so they drop Repel. So Jexay, Repel are gone from that support line, and Chio comes in. Fielder's blooming brilliant. Again, I think Fielder goes under the radar a lot of the time as well. It was only until really the back half of last year that I really started to sit there and think that, okay, yeah, Fielder is definitely like up there. And it's hilarious because every time I've talked about the top tier flex supports, I haven't mentioned Fielder, but really we need to start putting Fielder in that conversation. We need to start throwing Fielder in there because the radical amount of consistency that this guy brings to the table is just nuts. So yeah, Fielder, good. Fielder, very good. Fielder Chio backline, excellent. Upgrade over Fielder Jexay? Possibly, probably. I would say probably. And yeah, enough said. Or is it? Yeah, so they actually decide not to opt into this double flex support idea. As the off season has evolved, and as sort of like people's vision of what Overwatch 2 is going to look like has evolved, and maybe a lot of the 5v5 workshop stuff that we've seen has emerged, and what people are saying and rumblings and whatnot, I think the narrative has moved away from the double flex support metas that we were seeing at the end of the 2021 season, and I think that we're moving far more into a situation where people are valuing the main support again. So we're valuing our Lucio players and our Brigitte players, potentially our Mercy players, or hell, anyone else that they decide to bring out. So I personally think that this, in comparison to, let's say, Houston and New York, who have got 2 flex supports instead of any main supports, I think this is better. I think that you've got your main supports covered, you have your flex support covered, and I think that it's more likely that you're going to have a main and flex in the season rather than 2 flex. Let's just say that. So this is fine. It's not perfect. Like, it's not like 100% perfect, but I'm pretty sure that this is absolutely fine. Tanks. absolutely fine. What do I have to say? Harbin is arguably the best off tank in the world if Void didn't exist, and Fearless has proven that he is incredibly adaptable. He picked up Wrecking Ball to a really high degree at the back end of last year when everyone thought he couldn't. He proved that he wasn't just a monkey main, that he had a really excellent Reinhardt in his back pocket as well. Like, Fearless has it all. Both of these players have it all. And unlike Fate and Void, where I get a little bit worried about Fate playing on his own without the support of another tank and that synergy, I'm not worried about these two players having to play on their own. I think that both of them are talented enough and intelligent enough to be able to make solo tanking work in Overwatch 2. Arguably, I think that in terms of tank lines in the entire league, I think that Dallas are the most set. I think that Dallas had the best tank line in the entire league, and I think that they are the most set to go into Overwatch 2 with these two players specifically. And if I'm wrong about that, I'm going to cry. I'm going to cry. I will cry a great deal. I know I didn't spend a lot of time on that on the tank line, but I mean, I really can't say much else about it. Finally, DPS. Doha and Sparkle are still here. Good. What do I say? Good, you know? They signed Pine last year, but Pine didn't get a play because of visa issues, and look, they were fine. Like, they finished third, they won the May Melee without an actual Tracer player, you know? Sparkle picked up Hitscan along with Doha, they did it. These two players literally did it on their own, and they proved that they are mechanically gifted enough to be able to do that. So, nah, man, take a bow, Sparkle Doha. They do get the reinforcements being Griot and Fielder. Not Fielder, sorry. Can't read. Edison. They bring in Edison from Atlanta Reign. Okay. What are my thoughts on this? I think that Edison is, when he came into the league, I think that Edison was a really, really hyped up prospect. I do think that Edison could potentially reach like that peak again. And I think that Edison, from what I saw from him and what I've seen from him, you know, from before he came to the league, his Tracer is clearly should be his best role. I thought he played some pretty good Pharah actually when Pelican was unable to play in the Countdown Cup. So, you know, I didn't think Edison was necessarily bad. I think just, you know, Pelican is cracked. Otherwise, Edison probably would have been playing alongside Kai. So yeah, I mean, what's Edison's place on this team? What's Edison here to fill in, you know? Like, I think Sparkle showed us enough that Sparkle probably has, like, enough talent to be able to actually play that Tracer at the highest level. So what does Edison come into play, really, I think is the question. Like, I mean, maybe Edison comes into play some hardcore hit scan. Maybe. But that's what I think Griot is for, and we'll talk about Griot more in a bit. So I don't know. I'm a little bit unsure, but I think it's not harmful for Dallas to have like more DPS players in reserve just in case they need to flex over to some extra stuff. We'll speculate a little bit more about it later, but let's talk about Griot a little bit. So Griot comes out of Team Diamond as well. I think that Griot is fine. I watched a couple of VODs on Griot. He's fine. Definitely not one of like the superstar pickups, but I guess that you liken it to the same way that that Skewed came out of like a less respected team in Korean Contenders last year and turned out to be the best Brigitte in the league. You know, fight me, Lee Javon stands. He was the best. He was the best Brigitte in the league. So, you know, I think that with this player, at the very least, you're signing a future prospect. I mean, I think that you have to trust Rush enough at this point in the coaching role to sit there and think, probably knows what he's looking for in a player, probably knows how to develop him, especially with the coaching staff that he has around him. So let's just take a quick look at the coaching staff that he actually does have around him. Aid and Rascal. So Rascal came in. So when Rascal actually got signed, I thought Rascal was being signed as a player, and I was like, oh my frigging god, this team is stacked. But no, Rascal's coming in as a coach. Okay, right, that's fine. Okay, I'd love to see Rascal play, but at the end of the day, with Sparkle Doha, you don't really need the hero pool that Rascal has, you know. But I think, you know, Rush and Aid have proven that they are definitely excellent player managers and that they're really, really good at training and getting the best out of their players, like creating innovative solutions to when they don't have the hero pool maybe with them. And I think that's fine. Now they really basically, all bar like an extra flex support, they have every single role covered. Much like Shanghai, and much like as I'm going to say about Gladiators next week. I think that this team has got basically every single base covered, and I'm happy about it. I think they're great, you know? I think that Rascal, with his experience, should really, really help people like Guerrillo develop over time, so we'll see what happens. Personally, I do have to talk about any problems I might have with this team as well, right? So as I say, there aren't many. There really, really are not many problems, but based on the caliber of DPS player that they've signed, I really simply just think that they will probably end up running Doha Sparkle still. I simply don't see those two players not being played, you know, like the flexibility that they both have and like the ceiling that they showed last year was just incredible. Unless Rush and Aid and Rascal really see some Omega potential in Edison and Guerrillo probably more so. I think that they're both just there in the background in case that they're needed, you know. A little bit like a who are you situation on Shanghai, but we'll see. At the end of the day, only 2 of those DPS players have to pop off for Dallas to be successful again this year. So let's wrap up Dallas. What do I think the aim is for this team this season? They have to be gunning for the championship again, definitely. I think that if you're Dallas and you don't win anything this year, you're having a disappointment season. I'm having a day. You're having a disappointing season. I think you absolutely have to win something, and I think that you have to qualify for every single tournament as well. Dallas are top 2 in North America, and they're top 3 in the world. That is what I see about this team. That's where I would put them. That's where they're probably going to go on my power rankings in a couple of weeks' time. I like this team. They have proven that they can do it, and probably more than the other teams that are I sort of hold up there in that regard with them. I just think that this team is also the most creative. I think that this team has been able to sort of like play its way out of like a box a lot of times. And I think that with Overwatch 2 being so different and creativity probably, you know, being at its peak to, you know, figure out how the game should be played and what's the optimal solution at the time, I think this team might be very, very, very threatening. I cannot fucking wait for Dallas versus Houston in 3 weeks' time. I am so fucking ready. Like, honestly, Gigabanger. Fuck, Texas. The Texas Derby again. Oh, man. It's going to be a Gigabanger. Yeah, so everyone, that is the end of the team previews. Thanks for jumping in for those ones. We quite literally have 2 more. We finally made our way through 18 teams in the last 6 weeks, and we have 2 more teams to go. And I've saved some of the best to last. I've saved the Philadelphia Fusion just for one person in my chat for next week, and obviously the LA Gladiators. And I'm very excited to talk about LA, but I have a lot of reservations. I'm not biased about that team as much as I could be, so don't worry about it. I promise I'll give you a good account of that. So yeah, stay tuned for that next week, and essentially we'll catch you then. Thank you for watching today. Goodbye.